Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Abraham. I assume you can hear and see me. Is that correct? Yeah, good morning, Ame. Yes, okay, very well. Hello, Emily. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you today. So this week, I'm glad. Okay, so I will then proceed. The lecture is being recorded, so you'll be able to review it if you wish to do so. And obviously, those who are not in the room will watch it at their convenience. Today, I want to finish discussing Plato with you. We have several aspects of his ethics that we haven't yet touched on, and we're going to do so today. And I'll be happy to take questions also about anything we covered last day before we discuss any new material. So all of that is going to happen. And before that, I just want to make a couple of comments to you. I've begun to grade your essays. Some of you know this because you already have a grade posted and some comments from me. But in any case, I will get through them in the coming days. I can't do 80 essays in one night, obviously, but I'm working my way through them. And those of you whose last names end with letters that appear later in the alphabet, please be patient. I'm going through this first batch alphabetically from A to Z, okay? I know that you're probably used to it by now. If your last name starts with a W or a R or something that comes a little later in the alphabet, you'll have to just be patient. The second batch I'll do in reverse alphabetical order. All right, so I'll reward those whose names start with letters later on, and so I'll go from Z to A. Okay, for the next batch, and that way you'll perhaps feel a little bit more fairly treated. But in any case, I will grade them all, and you'll receive a grade in my comments. All right, that's in process as we speak. One thing I just wanted to say to you, because it's cropped up in quite a number of your essays, actually, and I feel now obliged to make a comment to you, which I think is quite important. So please take good note of it. All right, many of you, in fact, maybe most of you, are talking about something called ideology. I've entered the word in the chat room. And you're using this word in a way which truly is inappropriate. So you're describing Berkeley's ideology or Descartes' ideology or Searle's ideology. This word perhaps has come up in many of your other courses. I have no way of knowing. Perhaps it's a word that you've heard over and over again from the other professors. I have no way of knowing why this word is so popular and recurs so much in your essays. But I want to make clear to you that I've never used this term thus far in this course, and it's not going to be a term that I'm probably ever going to use with respect to the substance of this course. Why? Because it's strictly speaking, ideology is, if you like, a collection of ideas, or indeed you could say a philosophy, but it's usually a particular position that is really espousing a political position, independent of, and the real key part of the definition is that an ideology espouses a set of philosophical beliefs independent of epistemology, independent of epistemic considerations. So one might well describe a Marxist ideology or a Republican ideology or some other set of political beliefs that have nothing to do with epistemology, and there the usage of the word would indeed be appropriate. But please appreciate, therefore, that it totally doesn't fit. When you're talking about epistemology, specifically talking about Berkeley's epistemology or Descartes' ontology, and you're using this word ideology, I can only assume, correct me if I'm mistaken, the majority of you who are using are perhaps a little bit unsure of what ontology means or epistemology. We introduced these terms early on, and they're key to this first set of readings. Perhaps you think ideology is kind of a way of fudging the difference or capturing all the distinctions, but it's not. Okay, so if you're talking about what exists in the philosophy of existence, you're talking about ontology, and that's the correct term. Okay? Remember, philosophy of existence is ontology, right? If you're talking about knowledge, and you're talking about how it is we come to know things, and you're contrasting the rationalist with the empiricist view, as a good many of you have done in your essays, then you're talking about what? Talking about epistemology. You're talking about epistemology. And you're not talking. So in neither of those cases is ideology actually appropriate. So is that clear? I don't want to flog this horse, but I just want you to be aware that in philosophy, particularly, words are really important. Okay, yes, thank you for all the yeses. Don't be afraid to use these technical terms that we've introduced. We introduced them to your vocabulary so you'll have some facility with them. But ideology really means something else. Okay? So in your next set of essays, don't use ideology as a word unless it really pertains to what you're talking about. And if you're ever in doubt, you can always consult online dictionaries, and I'm pretty confident that they'll tell you the same thing that I'm telling you. Okay? So just a point of clarification. Be confident in your use of specific terminology. Just as in this part of the course, where we're developing ethics, and we'll be talking more later about deontology and teleology and so forth. So you'll be asked to use these other ologies. Okay, philosophy's full of ologies, but ideology is special. Okay, a question from Emily: will the essay 2 questions be posted soon? And Abdullah responds, I think they're already posted. Yes, they have been posted from day 1. And they're in the Google Drive folder under Supplementary Materials Part 2. Okay? I promise you'll find them there. If you want to start thinking ahead, that's fine. But we have a lot of ground to cover. Now we have 5 philosophers, and we're only on the second one. So if you want to look ahead, that's fine with me. How bad is the penalty for late submissions? Well, how late is your submission going to be? I'm trying to be lenient with you. Normally, I take away an increment per day. But in this case, I'm taking away an increment class. So remind me, your first essay was due on the, what was it, on the 5th? I'm trying to remember. When was your first essay due? It was due on the 12th. That's right. So therefore, an increment, okay, so I mean, I've said this before, and I'll repeat it. When I say an increment is 1 grade increment. In other words, if the essay was due on the 12th and you handed in 1 class late, meaning you get it in by Thursday, if it was due on a Monday, and then you get it in that Thursday, 1 late increment, which corresponds to 1 grade increment. A grade increment is the difference, let's say, between a B plus and a B. That's 1 increment. Or the difference between an A minus and a B plus, that's 1 increment. Okay? Or the difference between a C and a C minus, it's 1 increment. So every late increment is 1 grade increment. And that means if you hand it in next Monday, that is by the 19th, that's only 2 increments. I mean, that's still way too much. Don't penalize yourselves. But I'm being lenient with you. I'm not going to go each day. Your grade will come down to very little very soon. I want to give you the benefit of the doubt in these COVID times, and I know not all of you have enough privacy, enough time alone, so forth. But still, try and get your work in on time. It's the best thing for you. Okay? Yeah, I don't want you to panic in this course, Mimi, but I want you to get your work in. That's very important. And on Blackboard, everything comes with a timestamp. So you've already submitted. Well, you don't have to worry then. Okay? But if you got it in by today, then it's 1 increment. Okay? If you don't get it in until Monday, that's going to be 2 increments. 2 increments would go from a B plus to a B minus, for example. Okay, is that clear? We all clear on the housekeeping? All right. And I've also made some comments to some of you, and I'll repeat this because it's worth repeating. Some of you seem to understand the concepts, the core concepts quite well, but in your writing, you're not conveying a clear understanding. Maybe you're not conveying as clear an understanding as you actually have. It's hard for me to tell sometimes from the writing. So, and sometimes the writing is simply detracting from what you're trying to say because of either grammatical or semantic issues or sentence construction or other things. So sometimes you will see in your comments, not all of you, but some of you will see a suggestion that you that you get in touch with the Writing Center before submitting your next essay to me on Blackboard. Once your essay is drafted, you have the privilege of making an appointment with the Writing Center. It'll be a virtual appointment. But what they'll do for you, they're not going to teach you philosophy or correct your philosophy, but they're going to help you to express yourselves more clearly. They're going to give you a lot of invaluable guidance, whether it's in terms of grammar or punctuation, whether it's in terms of sentence construction, whether in terms of semantic clarity. If you're trying to say something but it's not clear what you're trying to say, they'll point it out to you, and they'll help you, therefore, to be much sharper in your self-expression. All of us need this. All of us. Okay, we all write. I write on a daily basis, and when I publish things, I always have the benefit of editorial assistance. You always want another pair of eyes on what you've written or what you will have written, who can give you objective feedback, and the whole idea of editing is to improve. So if you hand in something which has already been edited by the Writing Center, again, they're not going to correct your philosophy, but we're going to help you to enhance your writing. And for us in philosophy, obviously, we're traditional discipline. So what you say is obviously what's very important. What's on the page is the only thing I can evaluate. Okay? So the Writing Center is a great asset, and please utilize it. All right? Especially if I suggest it to you in the comments. And another thing you should know, because it's something that comes from my experience teaching this course, over now, I mean, 25 years. Of course, it's not the same course. I always want to improve over the years too, but basically teaching intro philosophy, I can say safely from experience that most students improve their essay writing during the process of the course. That not in all cases, but in most cases, second essay is a little better than the first in terms of all these other details I'm talking about, as well as the philosophy. And usually the third essay is better than the second. So I see in a majority of students, and I hope that includes all of you, but I see in a majority of students a gradual improvement over the course itself in the quality of the essays. And this comes from practice. The more you write, the better you'll get at writing. All of us are in that boat. All right, any more questions about housekeeping? You okay? All right. Very well then. So let's move on to the substance today. We're going to come back to Plato. Are there any questions, firstly, about anything that we covered last day? We did quite a bit in terms of laying out the foundation of Plato's ethics and how he is a little similar to Aristotle, but also in that orthogonal depiction by Raphael, precisely how he differs from Aristotle. And we had a look at his theory of forms and the idea that the form of the good is the most important one and the most difficult to apprehend, but then it illuminates all the others. So are there any questions about anything that we covered last day before I continue this treatment of Plato's ethics? You're okay? Okay, Mame. Anybody else? Anyone has a question, please feel free to speak or type it in. Everybody's okay? Well, he says no, okay. All right. So I'll assume if there's a continued silence, I'll assume that you're all happy, or at least that you all so far so good with what we've covered. And then I'll continue, all right? So here we go. First thing, and I have a number of major points to go through with you today. Basically at least three major things that we didn't discuss last day, which are part and parcel of Plato's version or vision of ethics and justice. So here's the first point. And students often ask this, and since nobody asked it, I'm going to ask you whether it's occurred to you that Plato is in pointing to the heavens, and you understand he's pointing up there metaphorically because pure forms are outside of space and time. Is that clear? It's very important. Right? This world is the world of appearances. Things appear to our senses. That's where Descartes got the idea. But the world of forms is never changing. The world of appearances is constantly shifting, and we can never trust it either, because we're in that cave and it's an illusion to a certain extent. What we perceive is not real. But the reality is, for Plato, the world of forms, the world of being, not the world of becoming. And that world is a world that is accessible by the human mind, but it is outside space and time. The forms don't change. All right. So there's a pure form of good, which is the thing for Plato that we need to apprehend in order for us to be good. In other words, if we apprehend the pure form of goodness, or the pure form of the good, then the essence, right, the essence of goodness will flow from that form into our being here in the world of appearances, and therefore our thoughts and our speech and our deeds will be infused with the essence of goodness, and then we'll be good people and good citizens, and also will therefore illuminate for us the other virtues. So goodness is a very key thing, because in that world of the forms, it's the sun that illuminates all the other forms, including pure form of justice, courage, wisdom, temperance. So if we want to be virtuous, we really need to apprehend the pure form of the good, because that will help illuminate all the virtues. And again, the essence of those things will flow into us. So this is Plato's view, right? Not only of ethics, but also of aesthetics. So Plato would say that if laws are just, it means that the legislators must have had some vision of, some grasp of the pure form of justice, because the laws they crafted, if they are just only and precisely because they contain some essence of justice. And the essence of justice flowed from pure form of justice into the copies we make, right? Constitutions, laws, all the various kinds of legislation that we craft are copies of the pure form, and they're either better or worse copies, right? And consistently with that argument, unjust laws are crafted by people who Plato would say are ignorant of the pure form of justice. They're not bad, but they're people who have failed to apprehend the pure form of justice, and therefore it's like shooting in the dark. They don't really know what they're doing when they're crafting laws. If they get anything just, it'll be accidental and not really because of understanding. So injustice is a product of ignorance. So that much I think I said last day. But the corollary is, and this is something that nobody asked, but I'll pose it back to you. It follows, right, that there's no pure form of evil. I mean, there is a pure form of good, Plato, and it's the most important of them. But evil means a lack of understanding of the good. Is everybody clear about that? It's important that you be clear about that. There is no pure form of evil in Plato's philosophy. So he does not give evil equal standing. And that's unlike so much moral teachings in the world, where we have, for example, the idea, we can go back to the ancient Zoroastrian religion, which is the huge world religion, came out of Persia. And Zoroaster was its prophet, and the Zoroastrians believe that the entire cosmos, what we call, the universe, is like a great moral struggle between the forces of good versus the forces of evil. So this is a bit like Star Wars, right? May the force be with you, right? Like there's this constant struggle between good and evil, right? And there are many kinds of philosophies. The Taoism believes that good and evil are inseparable. Yin and yang are a duality, and they're a product of Tao. But, the yin yang circle is the black and white, with a little white in the black and a little black in the white. And one of the moral implications is that nobody's perfectly good or perfectly evil. There's always a little bit of, there's a little black in the white, a little white in the black. It means that there's a balance and also an interpenetration. So saints all have some degree of sinfulness in them, which is unavoidable. And sinners all have some degree of saintliness in them, which is unavoidable. So there's this balance of good and evil. And that's another view. That's a completely different view. But Plato's view is really, really interesting, because it is similar to the Indian view, the Hindu view, and the Buddhist view. And they also uphold that there is no evil in the world. There's only a lack of understanding of goodness, of fundamental ignorance. Now, we don't know. I mean, historians don't know for a fact whether or not Plato's civilization of the day had any contact with Indian civilization. It was quite far, relatively speaking. I mean, the Greeks were great navigators. Athens was a city-state, and they were great traders on the Mediterranean. They had a powerful navy, and they sailed all over the place. But there was no Suez Canal. I mean, there was no way of sailing to India unless they sailed way out of the Mediterranean, went around the Horn of Africa. As far as we know, that was not something the Greeks did. Okay, Alexander, on the other hand, marched an army, right? I mean, Alexander was Aristotle's student who became Alexander the Great, and he marched an army all the way to India. But that was after Plato's time. By the time Alexander the Great came back with the remnants of his army, and he got it as far as Afghanistan. It was amazing that they marched an army all the way from Macedonia to Afghanistan and back. They didn't all make it back, but Aristotle went there to conquer the Persian Empire. He did not go there particularly to learn philosophy. But then again, Plato has another word that he uses in his Timeo and in other parts of his philosophy called metempsychosis, which means the transmigration of souls. So Plato believed that the soul survives after death and goes on and maybe takes another body. And that would be exactly the teaching of Indian philosophy. Those of you familiar with it, it's called reincarnation. So there's this sort of very strange hint in Plato of common ground with some of the fundamental precepts of Indian philosophy, and yet there is no evidence that Plato had any direct contact with any Indian gurus. There's no record of any Indian philosophers coming to Greece or of any Greeks going to India. He certainly went to Egypt, but I mean, that was just across the Med, that wasn't very far, but India was a far cry. Nonetheless, it's a puzzle. And Plato certainly, either intentionally or not, reinvented this really important and significant notion that evil is really an ignorance of the good. Okay, it does not have equal standing at all. It's not an equal and opposite force to goodness. He wants goodness to be more important and to give it, in a certain sense, supremacy over evil. You could say that's very optimistic, very idealistic, and no one would argue with you. That's Plato's view. Okay? It's very, very different from Aristotle, right? And the other fact is, which is really significant for Western civilization, is that this philosophy of Plato's had deep influences on Christianity. And that's the other point I wanted to make to you today. And some of you perhaps have been brought up in a Christian tradition, so you will have experienced this effect in the teachings that you received. If they're teachings of a religious nature, you will immediately experience this. And so the following is the case. If you read St. Augustine, City of God is one of the most influential books certainly of Roman Catholic theology. And it's where St. Augustine reinterprets the book of Genesis and gives us this concept of original sin. Adam and Eve, he says, were sinful in their natures. Otherwise, they would not have done what they did. And so we become, in that faith, the inheritors of original sin, right? Some of you may have been exposed to the teaching of original sin. Has anyone heard of it? I mean, I'm just curious. Yes, you have. Okay, original sin. That's a teaching from St. Augustine. Okay, it comes from Augustine was a bishop in North Africa, incidentally, and he was in Rome as a scholar at a time when Rome was sacked by the Visigoths. In around 407, Alaric and the Spanish Visigoths came and sacked Rome. And the book he wrote is called City of God. He had to explain how a Christian empire could be sacked by barbarians. It was a big challenge for them because Rome had converted in the 330s, 335 or so. Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity. So the Romans thought by 400 AD that they were under the protection of the Christian God. They had abandoned all these Roman gods of the Republic time, and they were now an empire, and they had converted to Christianity. They thought that, the God of the Christians was protecting them, and then in come these barbarians and sack Rome. So St. Augustine watched this, he witnessed this, and he had to reconcile it with Christian doctrine. So he wrote a book called City of God, and that's where he distinguishes between the city of God and the city of man. City of man is the political city that we live in. It's like Plato's cave, where, we don't really know what's going on and things don't always work out very well. But he viewed the city of man as a preparation for the city of God. The city of God is where we're judged, and if we're good and virtuous, we get into heaven. Okay, all of that. I'm not here to preach this to you. I'm just explaining that St. Augustine was a Neoplatonist. St. Augustine had studied Plato because the church had studied Plato. And what Augustine says in the city of God is a repetition of Plato's moral philosophy. Augustine said, I'm now paraphrasing Augustine, he said that evil is an ignorance of the good. He's just recapitulating exactly what Plato said. And so people who do evil, he said, are ignorant of goodness. And that's exactly what Plato said. So Augustine took Plato's philosophy and he embodied it in the faith, mostly of the Roman Church, but of other Christian denominations as well. So it follows that if you think about who is the equivalent, who plays the role, who's the CEO of evil in the Bible, who's in charge of bad things and of evil things. What's the name we give? We have so Satan is a very Lucifer, Satan, exactly. These are common names, right? The devil, right? These are all synonyms. And where's the origin? Is Satan equal and opposite to God in power? In that teaching, does Satan have as much power as God? Some of you are hesitant to answer. No, that's not. No, absolutely not. And what was Satan originally before Satan became the Lord of the underworld? He's a fallen angel, Timothy. Very good. Exactly. He's a fallen angel, but not equal. So Satan is less powerful than God. Satan was an angel who went bad. Okay, and so Satan is immediately not going to be placed on an equal footing with God. So evil can never be as great as good. And that is a consequence. I'm saying to you, this is a consequence of Plato's ethics. Because Plato did not accord equal and opposite value to evil. Evil is an ignorance of the good. Augustine repeats this, saying that he's repeating that evil is an ignorance of the good. And in our personification of evil, the thing that we choose to personify evil in that tradition is less than God also. Not as powerful as God, but as a fallen angel. Okay? So the idea being that good is in the end going to reign supreme over evil, no matter what. Even if Satan gets his way at times, good reigns supreme. That's the teaching, right? And so this is coming, I'm saying to you, this is part of Plato's influence. So, I mean, maybe I'm hoping now to open a window onto the magnitude of the influence of Plato's moral philosophy on Christianity. And that's about the nature of good and evil. Aristotle has an equal influence, but in the city of man, where we're talking about virtuous, because by this time, the early Christians thought, and this went on through the Italian Renaissance, where that painting is, coming from, Raphael's, right? We'll return to it today, that it's still important to be virtuous in the city of man. We have that ability to be virtuous in the city of man, and that's through Aristotle. But that's viewed as a preparation for being judged favorably and eventually entering the city of God. So that's how they put Plato and Aristotle together. They're not contradicting each other. Each one is playing a different role ethically. Is this clear? And that's why they're both at the center of that painting. They're not saying, okay, we get rid of one of them. They're actually twinned, because they both have a role to play. One here in the city of man, or in the cave, if you want Plato's analogy. But by being virtuous, we get out of the cave. We eventually apprehend the pure form of good. And in Christianity, that translates into being admitted into heaven. So that's part of the influence of these Greeks, who were pagans and coming from a very different tradition and had no inkling about Christianity, but nonetheless ended up having historically a pretty profound influence on it. And I'm glad you're seeing this connection. And one more thing, and this will complete the picture that I wanted to sort of draw for you about this. Remember, for Plato, you have in Plato's ontology, you have a pure form, let's say of goodness or whatever the case may be. And then what connects that form to the copy? This mysterious thing called essence. The forms are outside space and time. The copies are inside space and time. So we're talking about two different universes which are not directly in contact with one another, right? We live in the causal nexus where everything that we manufacture and everything we see in nature is supposedly a copy of a pure form, which resides in a changeless, timeless world. So how could they be connected? Well, they're connected by this mysterious thing called essence that flows from the pure form into the copy. So we say a sculpture is beautiful because it has the essence of beauty. We say that laws are just because they have the essence of justice, or that a person is good because they have the essence of goodness in them. Okay, that's Plato talking. That's exactly how Plato would account for these things. Does anybody see in that? I've just entered this in the chat room, right? This pure form and the essence that flows into the copy. Does that remind you of anything in Christianity? Something very, very important. No one's yet said anything, so you're getting close. I'm going to type it in. If you think about the Trinity, this is what it is. It comes straight out of Plato's metaphysics, right? They talk about the Trinity, don't they? I mean, that's a big thing in Christianity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? The Holy Trinity, that's right. And what is it? Well, God is the Father, yes? And that's a pure form. God is perfect, yes? God is not in space-time. God's the creator of space-time. God created the universe, right? So God must not be in the universe. It's a creation of God. So God is outside, and God is perfect, right? So God is like the pure form. And then the Son is a copy of God. Is he not? God's Son. It's a material copy, yes? And what connects them? Because it goes into the virgin birth and all this, the other teachings, but it's the Holy Spirit that makes that possible, is it not? Of course. So this Trinity, I hope you see that the idea of Plato's, which has nothing to do with Christianity, but you have a pure form and a copy of that form on earth, which are connected by this mysterious thing called essence. It has the ability to connect them. It's neither a pure form nor is it a copy, but it's the go-between. It's we call it today the interface in computer language, right? It's the thing that connects the two. And the Trinity is exactly a metaphysical a copy of this. I mean, it fits like a glove. You have the Father, which corresponds to the pure form, the Son, which corresponds to the copy, and the Holy Spirit, which corresponds to the essence. And that's all I'm suggesting to you. And so Christianity also owes this huge metaphysical debt to Plato, because the whole notion of the Trinity is also contained in Plato's ontology, okay, and metaphysics of morals. All right, so I just mentioned that in passing. These are all connections of how Plato gets into and so is so foundational for the philosophy of that religion. And now that's sort of part one of what I wanted to say to you. So evil can never have the same standing as good as the main moral message. All right. So now part two. Any questions or observations about that? Okay, that's fine. And notice that this is not going to apply to Judaism or Islam, because there is no Son of God. There are prophets, right? Judaism and Islam share I think, a similar notion of God, but they believe they have a book and a prophet, and that's a different pathway, okay, to God. In Judaism, Moses is the prophet and the lawgiver, right? And the book is the Torah. And in Islam, Muhammad is the prophet and the lawgiver, and Quran is the book. So they're not adopting this metaphysic of Plato's. They're adopting basically a different metaphysic. Okay, fair enough. They're all related as Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in chronological order of their appearance, are all called Abrahamic faiths because they all believe that Abraham is the patriarch, in fact. And, so it starts with Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses. That's the older version, what's called the Old Testament. And then Christianity did not repudiate the Old Testament. Just to be clear, Christianity said, well, yes, we actually accept the Old Testament, but we believe that Jesus was the Messiah, so now we have the New Testament, which is, the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that completes so Christianity is for Christians the completion of Judaism. And this Islam says that no, we respect Abraham as a patriarch, and we accept the prophet Moses, and we accept Jesus as a prophet, but not as a son of God, and Muhammad is the last prophet. And so Quran is the completion of the former two, in my understanding. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but this is why Islam says it's done. We're done. Muhammad is the last prophet. And Quran is scripture that is the last scripture, and therefore the one that is, going to, in some sense, complete the other two. So it's a completion process. But they all share this common root of Abraham. But they do not share Plato's. Okay, they do not share Plato's scheme. Christianity picks up on Plato, whereas Judaism and Islam do not pick up on Plato in the same way. So these are all interesting connections that you may or may not want to explore. All right, fair enough. Any questions about that? Okay, so let's carry on. The next topic is, again, a return to this discussion of the soul and balance of the soul. Remember that the soul for Plato is a little bit different. It's 3 parts. It's a secular soul and consists of 3 parts. But it's a little bit different from Aristotle's soul. But they would have agreed, Plato and Aristotle both would have agreed, that in order for a person to be just, then that person needs to have a balanced soul. The 3 elements of the soul would have to be in some kind of equilibrium, and then the person would be able to be just. Conversely, people who behave unjustly are people whose souls are out of balance. Again, they're not evil. They're ignorant in such a way as it allows them to, for their souls to become unbalanced. But if they were not ignorant, then their souls would be in balance. They could bring their souls in balance, and they would be just. And the 3 parts of the soul for Plato, you get different interpretations of this, but a kind of generic one would be that you have the instinctive part of the soul, which are like our appetites and aversions and other, what today we would call biological drives, and the Greeks called them appetites and aversions. And then you have the emotional part, the heart, right, which is representing the emotions, and in particular strong passions and courage, and some of the other passionate virtues would be in there. And these are the the strong emotions that we experience and act on at times. And then the rational part, which is represented by the brain or the mind, right, and our ability to reason. And these 3 parts need to be in balance in order for us to be good and just, and also, in a certain sense, happy, and not to do harm to others or ourselves. So people, and if you think about it, it's a very primitive kind of psychology, and maybe a very wise one. If you think about it today, in light of today, people who are in some way psychologically unhappy could be, if you like, described on that schema. Maybe not as accurately as the DSM describes them, but I don't believe everything that's in the DSM either. So you might want to think about it. But in any case, people who are psychologically, in some sense, not right or not well balanced would certainly be understood by the Greeks as having imbalanced souls. And maybe they have too much appetite or too much aversion for something. Or maybe they harbor too much negative emotion and don't know how to transform it into positive emotion. Or maybe there's something wrong with their thinking process, which is not working in a critical enough way, and they believe things that aren't true, or they somehow are misled by invalid or unsound arguments, and so they're unhappy because of the way they think about things. So all of those are possibilities, and any and all of those situations could lead to some kind of what today we would recognize as a psychological disorder, perhaps. Okay, so the Greeks were also psychologists, and that was their way of looking at, philosophically, at the human being. The psychology then was, of course, part of philosophy. Right. But what's interesting in the Plato's Republic is that he also maps that onto the actual city-state. That is, the three parts of the soul are mirrored in the three parts of society. So for a state to be just, it would also follow that the three parts of society need to be in balance too, correct? I mean, that's the metaphor. If the three parts of the individual soul need to be balanced for the individual to be good and also happy, then the three parts of society similarly need to be balanced in order for society to be good, happy, so forth. And how does he map that? Well, as far as the appetites and aversions are concerned, or the instincts, he maps that onto the people who produce things. So whether it's agricultural sector or the commercial sector or the artisans or the craftspeople or whoever is busy producing something, be it food or be it tools or be it clothes or be it whatever, right? Whatever people are producing belongs to the appetitive sector. Because we have markets for these things. People have appetites for these things, and that's why there's an economy, right? If you produce something that people want, then you're gonna prosper, right? So that's all appealing to appetites. If you produce something that people don't want, then you won't prosper. It has to do with aversions. So producers correspond to the instinctive part of the soul. Is that clear so far? And they're necessary. Any society has to have people producing things. Okay. And then the next part would correspond to and that's sort of like what the Greeks called it as the gut. Okay, the appetite is like the gut. And then the heart is the emotive, okay, the emotive part. And that corresponds to the auxiliaries in Plato's system, or the warriors. Why? Because we need people who are willing to be very passionate about defending the city, state, right? Very, very committed and very valorous. And in fact, willing to give their lives in defense, if necessary, to lay down their lives in the defense of the city-state. And that's exactly what we demand of our military, is it not? And so people who serve need to be courageous and need to be basically passionately devoted to defending the interests of the state. And so they are people who have all these virtues, such as courage and the other ones, but they're very strongly committed to that mission. And so the auxiliaries, or what we would today call the armed forces, belong to that component. And then finally, we have the so-called rational component, and those are the leaders on a good day, right? Are supposed to be rational. And moreover, they're also the lawmakers, so they need to be very closely in touch with the pure form of justice in order to make just laws. And this is the job in Plato's Republic of the guardian class, right? Whether you elect or whether they're appointed or whether, however it works for many systems of government. For Plato, the ideal rulers are these guardians who don't own anything, so they won't be tempted or corruptible, but they're governing out of principle and out of duty and out of wisdom, so they're very unusual. And they're trained to govern, they're very good at it, but they don't get personally enriched from it. They're not doing it for money, and they're not doing it for power. They're doing it really out of a duty to protect the state and to make the state just and to sustain justice in the state. So they're very noble in that way. And of course, there's never been a system of government like that, but that's what Plato envisioned in his kind of utopia. The Republic is a utopia, okay? One of the first, if not the first, utopian picture. So the guardian class is rational. They've been trained in philosophy, and they know how to think well and clearly and soundly. So this is corresponding to the rational part of the soul. So you see the map from the individual three parts of the soul to the mapping of the three components of city-state, Plato's envisioning. Is this clear also? Good. Okay, I mean, Mama, you're responding quickly. I appreciate that. And always you're quick on time, Abraham. Okay, so just stay with me. I want to get this feedback. It's important, at least for you to give me this monosyllabic feedback, yes or no, is very good. So I know that you're with me. Or if you have questions, then of course you can ask them. But this is the main goal. So you see the connection between the individual and the state. So it's like the individual becomes, the citizen becomes a microcosm, and the state is a macrocosm. So if you have a sufficient number of individuals who are just because their souls are balanced, then there's a good chance the state will also be just because its overall soul its political soul will be balanced. The personal soul is balanced, then the political soul can be balanced. If a bunch of people are running around, a lot of people are unbalanced, unhinged, not aware of virtue and not aware of the pure form of the good and ignorance and so forth, then you're going to have a lot of people in the microcosm where souls are unbalanced and they won't be capable of doing a lot of just things toward each other or themselves for that matter. And so the macrocosm will suffer accordingly. The state itself is not going to be a happy place to live in. It's going to be a dangerous place, a violent place, maybe a place which is not capable of providing or enabling a very good life for its citizens, no matter what they do for a living, whether they're in the producers group or the auxiliary group, the army or the defenders or the rulers. They're not going to be able to experience or help to sustain a good life. And the Greeks really wanted a good life. Eudaimonia, this idea of Aristotle's happiness, is the idea also of a good life. It's not just a mood, right? Not just a mood. A good life. Okay, so is that clear? So you get the idea of how the individual soul then gets summed over and becomes, if you like, macrocosmic in terms of what a just state would look like. So Plato is painting a really, whether you agree with him or not, I'm sure you will concede that it's a very interesting picture. All right, so two more things to deal with, and then we'll come back to any questions. The next topic, which is in the Republic. I didn't get a chance to mention this in any detail, but it's another story that occurs in the Republic. It's called the Ring of Gyges. And if you haven't read it, I don't know if it's in your extract. But if you look it up, you'll get the parts of the Republic where he discusses the ring. Here's the story. Gyges is the name of a shepherd boy. Okay? And this shepherd boy finds a magical ring. And guess what this ring does? He discovers that if he puts on this ring, it makes him invisible. So then it's very handy, right? Because Gyges is a shepherd and maybe he has bigger aspirations in life. So what does he do with this? Yes. It's not only kind of. This is where Tolkien got the whole premise. Tolkien was a great scholar, right? Tolkien was an amazing scholar and a very creative and very beautiful, writer. But I'm glad you see the connection, of course. So this is in Plato too. All right, the Lord of the Rings is in Plato. Maybe you'll come away with even a little more admiration for Plato because he's the one who came up with this, although maybe he heard the myth. And what happens in Plato is not dissimilar. Of course, Tolkien created this amazing trilogy about Middle-earth and the hobbits and all these characters. But notice that in his trilogy also, Sauron falls at the end, right? Goodness overcomes evil. Right? Because the hobbits are incorruptible. They're not very powerful physically, but they're incorruptible. Frodo was the only one. Remember, if this ring ever fell into the hands of men, it would be end of story, right? Remember, that's over and over again in Tolkien. You must never let men get hold of the ring, or women for that matter, because humans get hold of the ring, we're done. Okay, we're going to be totally corrupted immediately. What happens to the people who are overcome with the ring or the desire for the ring? But this hobbit is, because he's very simple and very humble and not ambitious and not vain and not egoistical, he actually becomes trustworthy in the ring bearer, but he's changed forever, right? It scars him too. But in any case, it comes from Plato. So you know the story already. I needn't repeat it, but I'll summarize it. So the shepherd boy finds the ring. Gyges finds the ring. What does he do? As soon as he realizes the power of the ring, he goes to the city. He puts on the ring. He sneaks into the palace. He seduces the queen, and they murder the king, and he takes over. Okay. And then a lot of bad things happen to him because look what he's done. All right, if you do this kind of thing, then you're gonna have to watch your back forever. So the ring totally twists him into a very unwholesome, very bad shape, and tempts him to commit, all these injustices, and nobody's better off for it at all. So that's the danger of the ring. Okay. So here's then the real premise, and I want you to think about, since you already you know the story. Thanks to Tolkien, we all know the story. He did a beautiful job with it. But it's in Plato. Read the Ring of Gyges, and you'll see that story in a simpler form. Here's the question. So I'm now going to represent Plato as someone who poses the following problem to you. All right. Suppose, just imagine that somebody came to town with a whole wheelbarrow full of these rings, okay? Or someone had a truckload of these rings, okay? Someone drives into town with a truckload full of these rings, not just one ring. There's a whole bunch of these rings. And stands on the corner and says, anybody want a ring? I'm giving them away. Opens the truck and there's nothing but rings in there. They're all the same. They're the ring of power. They're this ring, the Gyges. And if you want one, you can just help yourself. So someone drives into New York with a truckload of these rings and parks a truck at Times Square and says to people, here you go. You want a ring? Take it. What do you think would happen? Would people take the ring? What do you think? Would people take the ring? If it was on offer to them? If there was a big supply of rings? Yeah, why not? Why not? Well, but you know already. I mean, you've all seen Tolkien or read Tolkien. Why not, you say? Well, if you want to know why not, then watch Lord of the Rings or read Lord of the Rings or read Plato's Republic, and you'll see why not. People who would take the ring, Plato would say, are people who basically have unwholesome ambitions that they can't otherwise satisfy. Plato's point is, with respect to his moral theory, with respect to his ethics, and here I'm going to give you the punchline, all right? Or rather the moral of the story. Plato, I want to say and represent Plato as someone who would say the following thing. If your soul were already balanced, then you would neither want nor need such a ring, because it would only unbalance your soul. It would only unbalance your soul. Such a ring would tempt you into wanting something or getting something or committing nefarious deeds or crimes to get or want something that you never really wanted anyway, and are better off maybe without. So all I'm saying is this: if your soul is balanced, then Gyges' ring is superfluous. It's not going to do you any good. It can only do you any harm. And therefore, if your soul were balanced, I'm saying, according to Plato, you wouldn't want or need the ring. But if everybody's mobbing this truck and grabbing, oh, we got all these, the ring of power, we got millions of them, I'm glad you get it, baby. This is really important, okay, Mame, rather. Very important. So if your soul is balanced, who needs the ring? Exactly, Timothy. Greed is one vice. Yes, definitely. Definitely. And there are many vices. What the ring is going to do is going to stir up all these potential vices in us and give us power, certainly, to satisfy all kinds of potentially unwholesome appetites and want more than we actually need, and do things that would be harmful to others and to ourselves in order to get, and in the end wouldn't do us any good anyway. For Plato, the highest goal is what? What's Plato's highest goal in moral philosophy? We've been spent almost 2 full lectures on it. What's the noblest thing you can do morally? Is balance the soul and apprehend the pure form of good. Yeah, exactly. So if you apprehend the pure form of good, and work toward that, your soul is going to be more and more balanced, Mame. And if your soul is balanced, then what would you need with this ring? This ring is only going to do you harm, because you've already achieved the greatest good, is apprehending the pure form of the good, and through that, illuminating the virtues, and therefore bringing your soul into balance. No matter what you do, remember, in Plato's utopia, it's independent. Whether you're a producer, a farmer, a craftsperson, an artisan, an artist, or whether you're in the military or whether you're in government, it doesn't matter. If your soul is balanced, you're fine. And anybody's soul balanced is not dependent on what they do for a living. Right? It's not dependent on whether they're men or women. It's not dependent on any of that. It's dependent on their own virtue. It's a very beautiful thing. It's universal. It's human, and it's yours to exercise to bring your soul into balance. And therefore, Gyges' ring is totally unnecessary. Only in an unjust society, Plato would say, This would be like a social experiment, a thought experiment. You have a bunch of trucks. Now, not one truck full of Geiges rings, but you have truckloads and truckloads. You got a whole fleet of trucks full of Geiges rings. And you bring them into, big cities in different countries and try and give away this ring. Probably everybody's going to take it, no matter where you go. Plato would just say that's why the world is so screwed up. Because if you had really a just society as a macrocosmic entity, remember, it could only consist of a bunch of just individuals in the microcosm. And therefore, if you showed up with a truckload of Geiges rings, nobody would want them. Nobody would need them. That would be evidence of a just society. Whereas only where there's injustice, where people are not apprehending the pure form of goodness and not exercising the virtues or not illuminating the virtues, not balancing their souls, therefore the ring is going to be going like hotcakes. Everyone's going to grab it. That'll only make things worse. So that's food for thought, right? I hope, is this making you think a little bit about what's worthwhile? Good. I'm glad it is. That's what Plato wants from all of us, is to think about these things, right? But what's worthwhile in life, really? What's worth striving for in terms of inherent worth? The ring may be instrumentally useful, but it leads, as you see from Tolkien, to nothing but trouble, right? Whereas what's inherently valuable is our ability for Plato to apprehend the form of the good, which illuminates the other forms of the virtues and allows us to balance our souls. Okay, so that was another thing then. Last topic for today, same topic, but a different facet of this. And I hope you're seeing that Plato really, we're only looking at his ethics nominally, but we've touched on a lot of other topics. You see how we're touching on politics, touching on economics, touching on ontology, touching on psychology, touching on a lot of other things. And Plato is really full of very, very interesting ideas for us to contemplate and perhaps to internalize and act on. And that was why he wrote these dialogues, for a gift for not only his own contemporaries, but for posterity. That's why we're still reading him, because of his relevance. Last topic on this subject, subtopic on this subject. I'm going to go back to this picture. You remember, I'm going to share the screen with you, just to refresh your memories. We looked at the School of Athens last day. I'm going to share the screen. Okay, so you all remember I talked to you about the painting, and just sketched out a few different aspects of it, how important it is. It was really significant when it was painted, and it's still significant today. And we then were able to contrast the two center figures, the two moral philosophies, Aristotle and Plato respectively, and see how they are similar, but also how they are orthogonally different, not oppositional exactly, but orthogonally different. Okay. Any question about the painting itself or anything in it before I come to the point that I want to make today? Is everybody happy with the painting? Yes? Okay. So here's something else now. I want to show you a copy of this painting. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this before. Yeah, it's a real eye catcher. Yeah, it really is, Mommy. It's one of the most important paintings of the Italian Renaissance, and that's why it's so widespread. You'll see it everywhere. And again, if you look online, there are art historians who have identified most of the characters in there, most of the philosophers. Okay, so let me show you something else now. I want to show you actually a copy of this and ask if any of you have ever seen this before, which is a simplified version of it. But I want to show it to you and see whether any of you have ever seen it. So let me go back to the app and share a different version of it, namely this one. Okay, so you all see this one, right? And you see very plainly that it's a copy of the School of Athens, although it's somewhat a simplified copy. Okay. Do you know what it actually is? I mean, do you see where it is or what it is? Any ideas as to, I mean, first of all, where is this thing? I mean, I can tell you and I will, but what does it look like? I mean, given the context. Any ideas? Well, well, you're very close. It's a theater. That's right. You see the seats. Yeah, those are real. It's not a painting. Okay, I took this picture. I took a picture of this, and there are other pictures of it too. This might be the one I took, or it might be someone else's. But I was in there. I was in this place. It's a hall, and that's a big auditorium. Okay, so you're close. Theater. Yes, it's an auditorium that holds about 3 or 4 thousand people. It's a very big theater. It's called Makaguchi Hall. And this thing that you're looking at is a silk screen, 40-foot silk screen, okay, of this painting. You know what a silk screen is, right? Very amazing. This is a silk screen. Huge silk screen covering, yeah, it's covering, if you know what a silk screen is, it's very difficult to produce a silk screen. It's a lot of work. And this one is an enormous silk screen covering, it's the curtain. You see the fringe? See that yellow fringe on the bottom of it? That's the fringe. It's a curtain. It covers the entire stage of the Makaguchi auditorium. And this is an auditorium, main auditorium actually. The main auditorium, typing this in, main auditorium of Soka University in Japan. This is on the outskirts of Tokyo. Okay, that's where you'll find that thing hanging. It's the Makaguchi Auditorium. It's the main auditorium of Soka University on the outskirts of Tokyo in Hachioji, okay? Just outside of Tokyo in Japan. So it's a 40-foot silk screen. It's an amazing thing, right? Yeah, it's still there, Mimi. And I hope you ever get there, you could see it, you know, for real. It's amazing, right? Huge silk screen. So I asked, fortunately, I was a guest of the president of that university, a very important Buddhist world leader, and Daisaku Ikeda. I'll type his name also, since he commissioned it. Pope Julius II commissioned the Raphael. Now I'm telling you that somebody named President Daisaku Ikeda commissioned it. He commissioned it. And I asked him a question, since I was fortunate enough to be able to meet him and have a dialogue with him. And he created this university, so I mean, he commissioned it. And I asked him, I said, President Ikeda, I'm just curious why you chose Raphael's School of Athens, because here we are in Japan, which is a Buddhist culture, right? And also in Japan, there's so much Buddhist art. And beyond that, Asia is very rich in art treasures and masterpieces that are Asian in origin, not Greek, or not an Italian, you know, notion of a Greek thing, but Greek philosophy. So I asked him, I said, why did you choose this painting? Is it a fair question to ask a Japanese Buddhist leader why he chose an Italian version of Greek philosophy to, you know, for his auditorium? It could have easily been, you know, he could have picked a Buddhist theme, right? And his answer was astonishing. So because he's very philosophical and therefore he's a great inquirer. So he asked me, he led me to the answer. This is like Socrates would do. If you ask Socrates a question, Socrates will not answer your question. What Socrates will do is he will lead you to the answer by questioning you. Okay? That has to do with, again, Plato's theory of anamnesis, right? That we're born with forgotten knowledge, which we need to recollect. And the job of the philosopher is to help us recollect not only our virtue, but also important knowledge that's latent within us. So I asked President Ikeda why he chose this painting, and then he responded with a series of questions and went something like this. Well, he said, aren't these Greek philosophers interested in a good life and, in leading a good life and in teachings that conduce to leading a good life? I said, yeah, sure. And isn't Plato primarily the one who said that philosophers are like midwives to the birth of wisdom? Yeah, sure. I've already mentioned this to you. It's in the Theaetetus dialogue. That Plato's philosophy included this important component of anamnesis, that we're born actually with knowledge of the virtues. The virtues are in us, but we need to have the philosopher sometimes to help us give birth to them. And so the philosopher is a midwife to the birth of everyone. Is pregnant with wisdom. Everybody's pregnant with courage, pregnant with all of these virtues, but the philosopher is the midwife who helps you give to your own virtue. And of course I said, well, sure. I mean, that's clear. That's our understanding in the West. And so he said then, well, that corresponds to a very important set of teachings in Buddhism. And these are called so here's a bit of Buddhism for you today. Bodhisattva practices is what it's called. Bodhisattva practices. Now, this is a way of connecting Plato to Buddhism. I've already showed you that Plato had such a huge influence unwittingly at the time, but he ended up influencing Christianity. It turns out that Buddhists can look at Plato and say this guy and his contemporary philosophers were actually doing something that they recognize in Buddhism as a bodhisattva practice, where the bodhisattva is somebody who helps people realize their own enlightenment, that we're all enlightened according to this teaching of Buddhism, but we're kind of not aware of it, we're not awake to it. And so part of the practice is to wake up our own Buddha nature, which means awakened one. Buddha, by the way, means awakened one. That's all it means. Well, it's a big thing, but it means we're awake to our own virtue. Once again, okay? We're awake to our own full capacity as human beings. And we do that sometimes with the help of bodhisattvas. So what this great Japanese Buddhist leader was telling me is that when they look at Raphael's school of Athens, they are seeing a bunch of Buddhists. I mean, they're seeing a bunch of people who specifically are helping others to awaken. These are advanced themselves. These are people who are very advanced themselves because of their own practice. And they're able to be of great help and of great service to others in awakening them to their innate virtues. So he was able, through this explanation, to show me something I never knew about Plato, namely that Mahayana Buddhists could look at him and say, oh yeah, we recognize this. This is something which we do in Buddhism also. So there's another connection that Plato had no idea that he was able to make. And I think he would smile if he could bring him back today and show him this auditorium. He'd probably be even happier. He said, wow, I didn't realize I had that connection to a major world religion, that comes out of Asia. So, but remember what I showed you with Aristotle in the ABCs, right? That Aristotle's virtue ethics had this common ground with Buddha and Confucius in the middle way. Let's remember that. And now here's another connection, this time between Plato. The idea of the philosopher midwife is very similar to Bodhisattva in Buddhist teaching. So is that a surprise for anybody? I mean, is that illuminating, surprising? Tell me something. Some feedback. Is that interesting? Is it a new insight? Yes? Okay. I'm glad. It's a different connection, and I didn't discover it until much later in my life. It's certainly nothing that I learned about when I was studying Plato, clearly. I guess that university hadn't been built yet. So it's food for thought. And maybe it also would suggest, it might, to me, it suggests something, once again, about the universality of being human, and that it's certainly to virtue ethicists, I would say, less important where we come from, particularly, which country we're born in or which language we speak or which culture we grow up in. That's something that all of us have as a particularity, certainly has to do with the particular circumstances we all find ourselves in. But that's only one thread of a much bigger tapestry that we all share, and that is the tapestry of our humanity and our common humanity. So all of us, regardless of what place we come from or what culture we grow up in. All of us, Plato would say, as Buddha would say, as Confucius would say, that we have this capacity to be virtuous beings, to have balanced souls. And if we achieve that, then we don't want or need Gaji's ring for that matter. And also that's a pathway to a just society, okay? A just society. And that's a pretty big theory of justice coming out of this treatment initially about ethics. Okay, is that fair enough? I'm tempted to say one more thing. Okay, Mame, thank you. I'm tempted to say one more thing, which is that this also connects, it's not just from Greece, not just comparing Greece to China, to India, where Buddha comes from. It also is quite relevant to the USA and to many of the problems we're experiencing today. We'll just mention one thing in passing, and we'll continue next day with of course, Thomas Hobbes, very important philosopher. You're also going to love and hate this guy. You're also going to find things in Hobbes that you're going to agree with and things you probably won't. But he's going to make you think too. Okay, all these philosophers are making us think, at very least, about what does it really mean to be good and to be just. Okay, that's the important part, making you think. I want to say this to you. If you remember Dr. Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, which I remember because I was alive when he gave it live, and it's been often printed and repeated and analyzed. But you remember one of the things he said is that he wanted his children to grow up in a world where they would be judged by what? Anybody know that speech? Martin Luther King wanted his children to be judged by what primarily? Anybody remember? The content of their character. Exactly, Elijah, the content of their character. Well, it should not surprise you that Dr. King, of course, had read Plato and Aristotle. He knew very well what virtue ethics were. Because when we say judging someone by the content of their character is exactly, I would contend, a synonym for their virtues or their vices, right? What is it that our characters contain? Our characters contain pretty much what we practice, what we espouse, right? Our moral principles, our predispositions, and our virtues, or indeed our vices, or both. So he's also a virtue ethicist when he says this. That's certainly my interpretation of that part of his speech, and I'm not the only one who makes it, because he's saying that's the most important thing. And what he also said, of course, is the color of our skin is not the most important thing, nor is, for that matter, our gender the most important thing. For virtue ethicists, it's always what's inside, not what's on the outside. What's on the outside is a fact of life. It's what we happen to be born as, but it's not the most significant part of us as human beings. What's significant is what we cultivate inside. That is what shines through everything. That's what illuminates our path. That's what makes us happy and others to be glad to be with us, or makes us dangerous and others to be fearful of being with us, or whatever the case may be. It's the content of your character that will shape your path, more importantly than all the other things. So that's what a virtue ethicist would say. This is clearly what Aristotle says. And also Plato, on a very different way of understanding ethics, is saying that too. We still need to be in touch with our virtues and awaken them. And so I think that it's important to realize that gets transplanted into the time of Martin Luther King and that era of civil rights, because he was really particularly interested in people being judged by their characters and not by anything else. So if the Bill of Rights applies, then it certainly applies to everybody, regardless of all these other things. It applies only to you as a human being and to your right to be a human being, and therefore to the liberty and opportunity you hopefully have to display and to develop the content of your character. All right, that's the larger purpose of virtue ethics, to provide a lamp that shines from the inside out. Okay, I'm going to stop preaching. I just wanted to, I'm just kidding. I'm not preaching, but I wanted to make that connection with virtue ethics. Is not only something that goes to Japan and it goes to India and it goes to Europe. It also comes right here. Okay, you get it. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions before we wrap up this session? Anna, please.
It's about the philosophy paper that was due on Monday.
Oh, the paper. Okay.
So I didn't realize, because it was my first time using Turnitin as a
Hmm.
option, so I didn't realize you had to confirm it.
You do.
But when you said earlier in the class, that's when I realized that I
Did you
didn't.
upload it? Has it been uploaded by now?
Just now, yeah, earlier in
Okay,
the
don't worry about it. Okay, don't worry about it.
you
Okay.
about like a
I know
picture.
some people had, this was new to them, so don't worry about it. Okay.
Okay, so my grade won't be penalized
When did you upload it?
just now, but I sent an email of like
Yeah. And
picture.
somebody else was in the same boat and they sent me a screenshot. I'm not going to penalize anything today.
All right,
Okay. Everything that's there now will be graded when I get to it, but without any penalties. Okay. Anything after today, I'll start applying the increments.
all
Okay.
right, so much.
All right. No problem. Anything else, Mame? You have a question?
Yeah, so like basically if you get the confirmation email that shows that you submitted it, right?
Yeah, that should be good enough. I mean, if you can see it there, I can see it there. Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right. If you can see it, I can see it. If I can see it, I can grade it. That's how it goes.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
Blackboard, you have to go up the learning curve. But once you've all done it this time, you'll be easier for you to do it, for number 2 and number 3. Okay, but if you see it there, I see it there. I don't know exactly what you have to do to submit it, but I know what I have to do to. But at the end of the day, if you see it and I see it, okay, so rest assured. All right. Yeah, I should rest. Okay, Mimi, I'll do what I can. I have a lot of to do this week. But anyway, I look tired. I don't want to look tired. I want to look happy and inspired. But thank you very much, everybody. I want to stop the recording now. Before I do, I've just typed in the name of the next philosopher. He's not in your book. He's in one of the readings. You have to go to the Google Drive folder. You're very welcome, everybody, all of you. But this is what you need to read. Thomas Hobbes. Jumping now to a very important philosopher. And so please read the extract from Thomas Hobbes, as we will be covering him next week, starting with Monday. Okay? Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. I'll stop the recording now, and I'll look forward to seeing you all on Monday morning or whenever I see you again. Okay? Take good care. And please read Thomas.